Welcome back. I'm Alfred Webre, and we have the extraordinary privilege coming to us from London, I assume?
No, Wiltshire,
Oh,
the home of the crop circles, and we've already had about 6 or 7. So
oh, there we go. We have the legendary, I must say, Miles Johnstone of Bases.
the basis project,
Welcome,
yeah, yeah,
welcome.
and
Miles, well, welcome to COVIDGATE 7. Our gracious host is attempting to get in. The deep state, just to use that overused term, has been working overtime to keep her out, but we just move right ahead. So we
yeah.
want to get your wisdom on this pandemic process and on its implications and its workings. So over to you.
Well, I've become very friendly with a really decent guy called Piers Corbyn, who is the brother of the former leader of the Labour Party in this country, called Jeremy Corbyn. I've got to be careful here because he's a TV host with the same name, similar name. And he's warning about the Nazification of the United Kingdom. I really had high hopes for Boris Johnson and voted for him. And to see the scale of betrayal in this, and I know I'll get into trouble about this, but I call it a plandemic. I see that the World Health Organization, which, cutting to the chase, I did a lot of work. I did some work with Michael Shrimpton, and Michael Shrimpton published an extremely important book on the German Defense Intelligence Agency called the DVD. Now, the DVD starts with Deutsche, and then the word in between is an unpronounceably long German word. But this is a very old intelligence agency, which if you read the level and scale of infiltration into governments across the world, it would make my hair grow. So in that context, we're looking at the present situation as basically the Fifth Reich. The Third Reich was World War II. During World War II, they established the Plan for Europe, which became the EU. British prime ministers at the time, during all that era, General de Gaulle, were all DVD assets, and they essentially brought in the Fourth Reich, which was a lot of people will have heard of Project Paperclip. Well, Project Paperclip was a much deeper and larger infiltration into governments in the United States and the UK and Russia. The difference is with the Russians, they didn't quite assimilate their Nazi scientists. They sort of kept them slightly at bay. It wasn't all about Wernher von Braun and a space rocket. It was the creation of fundamental institutions. In the UK, it was the establishment of key ministries which were to perform key functions, and they're doing those key functions now. And that is essentially the full-scale New World Order Nazification of all society. So from that point of view, we are in serious trouble. Now, this involves the secret space program, or the SSP, and there are all sorts of subtle and very important things going on in different levels with very good people. And I think from our point of view, who I would say we could best describe ourselves in Civvy Street, it's up to us to alert as many people as possible as to what's going on. But as soon as you realize that you're dealing with a non-responsive individual, you've got to be very careful, because it's your neighbor who's going to shop you. It's those people who giggle a little bit and think you're a bit silly. They can get nasty. And so you have to be careful. You have to, see who you can talk to, and don't spread fear. But we are in a very serious situation. And it's not going to get any better unless we use peaceful means to establish to highlight to those who are simply living their lives and don't know all about the details of the sort of stuff that you and I would be talking about over 10 or 15 years. They're learning on catch up. They're trying to figure out, the ordinary people are clearly figuring out something is wrong. The way things change every 5 minutes, almost. The law and the things which are issued here in Britain, I mean, now we can have a single person can form a house bubble, a social bubble. What the hell does that mean? And then the World Health Organization is saying that you don't need any masks anymore, but then today, in the last couple of days, the British government's brought in laws to do that. In Holland, I understand that if you break, in this country, it's 2 meters, but in Holland and in Europe, it's 1.5 meters. So what the hell's the difference between half a meter? But there's a legal difference there. And in Europe or in Holland, they're talking about bringing in a €9,000 fine and three weeks in jail. So and as others have discovered, the key things they're doing is making sure we are as miserable as possible. They're taking any of the nice things in life and destroying them. So whether this is clearly a plandemic. I've just seen somebody who's been in hospital today. This morning, they had to go to hospital, and they went to Salisbury Hospital, which happened to be the hospital where the so-called Russians infiltrated Porton Down or whatever it was, and there was this release of radiation which killed some people, which was very bad for those people. But the whole thing was a setup. But she was talking to a BBC TV crew for their very esteemed late-night current affairs program called Newsnight, and they were filming people in the hospital. And she made a very clear and very eloquent statement all about this to the BBC. And they're all wearing their masks and stuff like that. But you've got guys wearing masks, puffing and blowing in and out. And it's a joke. So the whole thing is such a farce that ordinary people are beginning to realize it. But you've got an awful lot of people who are genuinely very scared. At supermarkets, there's a lot of trouble happening. So in everyday life, 1 minute you feel free, and as soon as you feel, we can do this, then they hit you with something else. So even with some of the ordinary people, they can see there is some kind of process happening. The British may be programmed 100% by the BBC, but they're not as dumb as these government organizations would like them to be viewed, which happened in the last couple of elections. The media channels here absolutely slammed UKIP, absolutely slammed Michael Farage on every single opportunity. They were hammering, making him look foolish, making him look the big bad wolf. Yet there was a massive vote for him, and obviously this massive vote for Brexit. So clearly, we're dealing with an empire which is believing its own propaganda, believing its own statistics, its own lies, and they've lost contact with the actual. So that means that ordinary people need to start communicating in ordinary, simple ways, which is not on social media. I'm telling people to start using VHS tapes. This is a thing called a cassette tape. And it's actually something, Stuart Sverdlow, of all happy, nice people, is on this tape. It's 30 years old. I can stick it in a machine and play it. I don't even know if you could do that with any kind of social media or any kind of digital media. I think I've just had to replace a hard drive today, 5 years old, and it fails. So I'm suggesting that people start communicating with the old forms of communication. That's to say CB radio. Now in the British Isles, that was basically started and stopped, but established older ways of maintaining communication, wired telephones. The hardwired telephones can be interfered with and they can cut the line. But I've just been speaking to somebody whose iPhone suddenly went blank. It's taken her 6 to 7 hours to try and get the iPhone to work so she can use it as a virtual network to get her Mac to work before she can go online to pay somebody on a bank. So and as we don't have our host here, Seven, for similar sorts of reasons. But one of the things which we found out was the machines have got an intelligence in them. And I know you've done a lot of work on the AI, but for those who don't know, something which I discovered way back in the 1989, when in our off days in broadcasting, I was working at Sky Television. We got 12-hour days. Sometimes we would have a little bit of downtime and play a video game on the computer. And these were 286 computers. And this is the days of a floppy disk. This is before most of the audience was born. And I was discovering that the video game would have a different performance depending on your concentration mentally with the computer. It wasn't down to keystroke speeds or how long you pressed a key, which would then put pulses into the video game, and then it would mathematically work out that you're going faster or whatever. These are floppy disks with 256 kilobytes of data on it, max. Yet there was something happening with the game. There were certain tasks in the game which required you to link, as I found out later, your consciousness was linking with a consciousness in the computer, and then your consciousness was actually controlling the game. Speeding on 30 years. There's a company was set up in Belfast, which is actually from Portland, Oregon, called Puppet Labs. And two of the buzzwords in AI, buzzword number one, or buzz phrase number one, is mass particle optimization. And the other little phrase is swarm technology or swarm algorithms. And this is all about taking lots of individual, allegedly random little particles, i.e. people, and connecting them in such a way that they operate completely as one hive mind. And that's what Puppet Labs is about. When I started the BASIS project way back in 1994, it was about German World War II technology being brought into Britain, where they started to make aliens or transgenic or strange looking humans. And they were called program generated life forms. Now there's a more modern name, non-human cyborg units. But we then discovered that the British invented in vitro fertilization, not for the purposes of helping infertile couples, but for producing biological robots for use on, quote, the lunar base. That's Britain's lunar base. So we're dealing with a whole secret space program involving the British, the Americans, the Germans, and they're all mixed in here and in part of the fundamental structures of society. And right now, that's all beginning to flower. It's beginning to really raise its final stages of construction of a completely unified social order where everybody's consciousness and everybody's meta abilities, that's to say, manufacture reality, is being accessed, our consciousness is being globally accessed to create something which is not for the benefit of any life on this planet. And I'm suggesting that the only logic to this is whatever's doing this is not organic. We've had Extinction Rebellion, which, like the Nazis, has taken a rune and they've inverted it so it's a toxic black magic symbol. And they are talking about carbon dioxide and how bad that is. And basically they're attacking organic life. So anything that's organic, they don't like. They want to reduce and control. But what the big elephant in the room here is the Maunder minimum. Now we're in a Maunder minimum. It's only just commenced. And a couple of days ago, about a week ago, where I live, it's the great wheat crop growing, the barley and oats and these wonderful cereal crops which grow in these really huge fields in England, and that spreads right across into Ireland and of course right across into Europe, Czechoslovakia, Romania and all that. And we're having harvest failures. We're 2 months at least behind in the crop right now. We've only started this Maunder minimum. But something which I was able to do was to do 2 master classes in weather. One was with Piers Corbin, and he explains, he does this thing called Weather Watch. I think it's Weather Watch. And he predicts the weather accurately, and people pay him for that, or people just say, thank you very much, we'll take the insurance risk and make money on the insurance risk. And another lady, very prominent and very brilliant professor, Professor Valentina Zarkova, and putting it in simple terms, right now we are in a 35 to 37-year-old Maunder minimum. B, the magnetic field effects of the electric universe are practically unknown in astronomy and physics. They don't pay any real attention to these magnetic effects. And what's happening now is the Earth and all the planets are now being exposed to 2 opposing magnetic waves from the sun. Now, what's going to happen is around about 2035, those 2 opposing magnetic waves are going to reach all the planets of the solar system in maximum opposite energy waves. Now, when you have a maximum, when you've got what they call destructive interference, or a big positive quantity of energy and a big negative quantity of energy, in this case, magnetic energy, we would think of them as adding and then collapsing to 0. Well, energy cannot be created or destroyed. So what happens is it collapses in 3D, but emits a massively wider amount of energy in 90 degrees or in another domain or energy dimension. So what's happening is this is affecting all of life on Earth in different dimensions, in different realms of what we call pocket dimensions. So we are not the only people being affected here. All life's being affected here. And so right across the spectrum, the spectral energy spectrum of life forms, there are major things happening. So a lot of them are beginning to are seeing that's what's happening with our domain, in our metaphysically so-called 3D domain. Something is causing an extreme effort to harness the collective consciousness of every human and every living thing on the planet for a nefarious and dangerous and toxic purpose. So that is when we have to pay attention and simply find the Achilles heel on that and neutralize it. And I think that's what's going to happen fairly soon in terms of the exposure of the secret space program. And hopefully the guys who in all the relevant positions are doing their best will come forward and fruition. And then we'll have a nice, wonderful domain, a nice, wonderful Earth. So I think that's and the thing about it is, the other thing I've been given to read out. Have you heard of these people, Alfred? The Kingdom of Mana. Could you see that? Well, just in case,
I'm seeing
it's notice from Mana, with authorization from His Majesty Michael Urel I. That's Urel. That's U-R-I-E-L. The Sovereign Kingdom of Mana. Have you heard of those guys?
I have not come across. I've heard recently of King John II, Greg.
Well, he's a
Greg
pretender
Hallett.
to the throne. Yeah, I for some reason, I don't know why. I don't know why. I just don't take him seriously. One of the reasons for that is when Diana was terminated, Princess Diana, there was another pretender who explained how she was dispatched. Essentially, MI5 was either, what's her name? Prince Charles's current wife. What's it?
Camilla?
Camilla. Either Camilla had to go or Lady Di had to go. And what happened with Camilla was she was driving her car, which is always a very good thing to do if you're going to drive anything. But what happened was it had been rigged. That is to say, the steering wheel and the accelerator had been, basically the cruise control had been altered in such a way that you couldn't disengage it. And this is a standard way or a fairly convenient way of bumping people off. So essentially, Camilla was driving the car. The car suddenly accelerated to maximum. And what they then do is, as the car increases its speed, what they do is they then tug the steering wheel, causing you to turn and crash.
Oh, there. Wait, there's a sound coming in. I can't see what that is. Can you hear that?
I can. It looks as if somebody's got their mic open.
Yeah, it looks like that's. Let me try and find that from the window from which it's coming, and because you are about to reveal something very important, and let me just.
Well, I'm certainly sure there's no conspiracy here, but what I'll do is I'll mute my mic.
And that is all of a sudden Kay McEnany, who is the White House press secretary, started talking, and so I apologize for that. But
oh God!
Whatever.
So Alfred, I mean, what you're saying is
synchronicity. That
synchronicity.
Yeah,
that's right. You know, I mean, some people could take this personally, you know, Alfred.
That's pretty heavy duty.
I mean, I can have a hissy fit and say, I just run around in circles, counterclockwise, of course. So anyway.
Yeah, sure.
What basically happened, and this was being told to us by a pretender to the throne or somebody who basically claimed to have a right to be the king. And essentially, Camilla's car was at the point, she was at the point of being assassinated, where the car was speeding up without her control. And then all they needed to do was click that second micro switch, and that would turn the steering wheel full lock one way or the other. And of course, that would get the car to spin and she'd die a horrible, miserable death. The problem was another car came round, which completely screwed up the assassination, because then he would have witnesses and then they had to call the operation off. As soon as you got any complications with an assassination, switch off and go. So what happened is Camilla was then able to get control of her car, stop the car, and she got out and ran like hell because she knew that her car had been taken over and that was it. So then they had the task of, MI5 had the task of having to bump off Diana, and MI5's a domestic, the domestic organization in the UK. So that meant it had to fall over to MI6. And basically MI5 basically says, look, we were really lucky there because it was too close to being too unlikely. People were alerted, you know, what's going on here? So they had to basically bury their tracks. And this is what this guy explained. So then what happened was MI6 did the job in Paris. The car speeds up like hell and then suddenly gets turned to crash. And that happened. That's why we never got any access to the car, because you'd see the resultant servo mechanisms. And then, of course, she didn't actually die, so they had to bump her off in the ambulance. And that's all part of the Lady Di assassination conspiracy. Now, I've had this happen to me with the Max Spears thing. Some people are very annoyed about me sort of being suspicious over Max Spears' death, double death. Everybody dies once, definitely, right? There's only two things in life which are certain: death and taxes. But dying twice, now only James Bond's allowed to do that, right? You only live twice. So Max died twice. So there was something going on there. And that's another thing altogether. But I actually got in the car, and as I sat there, I heard voice to skull saying, "You are going to die. Woo, you are going to die." So that repeated itself a couple of times. And, well, you know, oh dear, I'm going to die. So I was driving the car, and lo and behold, cutting a very long story short, the cruise control wouldn't disengage. And I was coming up the off-ramp that you're meant to be doing a thing called slowing down. Slowing down is a good thing to do on a ramp when you're leaving a highway. Definitely a good idea. There's other cars there. You're meant to come to a dead stop. All those sort of things are usually very good to do. And it wasn't happening for me because the car was not, I had the ability, because it wasn't an automatic, that helped. But because when you've got an automatic, you've got no control really of your transmission, or a lot less control. So I was able to use the gears to jerk the engine and shock it. And there's other things in the engine which takes it out of, to protect the engine. So I was able to slow down. And then I was waiting for them to try it again. And alas, they did try it again. This time was when I was driving actually on the motorway itself. And it was 50-mile-an-hour zone. And I was again increasing in speed. It wasn't going to, so I got out of that one twice, and a few other things. So I'm aware of that kind of technique. So where are we going with this? We're basically going with a situation where we have had we've got to look at this in a second wider perspective. Are you aware of 2045.com?
2045.com. No, I should go there, but I've
that's letters. It's numbers. 2045.com.
Yeah.
Now these are a bunch of scientists who've decided that humanity is basically a bunch of useless people. The term "useless eater," something I'm putting together on one of my YouTube channels, is a lot of. Do you remember Anthony J. Hilda and Jordan Maxwell?
Yes, and just to jump in here, very, very, very briefly, a colleague of mine who was in Project Pegasus as a childhood participant in DARPA CIA time travel, Andrew D. Bashago, said that he routinely jumped between 1971 and a DARPA forward time base in 2045. And his job was to retrieve time scrolls from the future, that is, messages from the future in 2045,
yeah,
bring them back to 1971, and they were instructions from 2045 how to get successfully to 2045. He remembers being at 2045. He was a 7-year-old child, and that people were very tall, kind of tallish people. There was teleportation from room to room. That is, people would have teleportation between buildings then, and people. There were a lot fewer people around. He would teleport to DARPA's forward time base in 2045 in New Mexico. So
Was it
that,
real?
and so 2045 always stuck in my mind as a very significant date. Now, one of the reasons why I give his stories such powerful credence is that DARPA teleported my book, Exopolitics, which was written in 1999 and published in 2005. They teleported it backwards in time from 2005 back to 1971, where it was opened in a meeting. It was brought back in a time satchel in a meeting in which Andy was with a couple of other people, and he saw it in 1971. And just to add this, in 1971, I was general counsel of the Environmental Protection Administration of the city of New York. I used to give public speeches, and I was invited to give a public speech to about 50 people in a nondescript building. They all had suits and ties. I knew instantly that they were agents. They were Project Pegasus and the CIA. They wanted to check me out because they had my book that I would write around the year 2000. They had brought it back.
Have you heard of Project Oak Tree?
No, tell me about that. No.
Oak Tree is meant to be a project involving, I mean, where I am at here in Wiltshire, there's loads of military bases. Just down the road from here, there's a prison called Earlstoke Prison where James Casbolt was incarcerated, and we've never seen him since he was officially released, like 2 years ago now. He's gone. But one of the things about Project Oak Tree is a time travel experiment. And one of the favorite places where they have crop circles, they have a sort of a reality management interdimensional gate. And certain individuals identified areas around here as where there's large ET craft. And not too far away from here is where they started to make these program generated life forms just up the road here in Hertford, not Hertfordshire, Hampshire, I think it is, Hampshire.
Okay.
The English countryside, the M4 and the M3, a lot of stuff underground, a lot of reality knitting technology. Colleague of mine, when she was here only a couple of weeks ago, I was demonstrating and trying to explain to her that when you drive in this particular direction, i.e. from west to east, you find you can get there much quicker than you do it in the opposite direction. It's just a straight road, well, a slightly bendy road, but there's something happens to you when you enter this particular area. What I hadn't realized was, she's driving very slowly. What's wrong? She'd already been clicked. She was already, whatever was accessing it, accessed her. And then when we came up to the place where you would normally turn left or right at the T-junction, she suddenly came back in. He says, well, where the hell have I been? What's happened? So that was a little demonstration. And that, I mean, they didn't have to do that. But what they did was they chose to demonstrate this to the individual I was actually trying to describe it to. So she actually experienced it. And where we came to a halt is where some of the greatest and most famous crop circles have happened. And that's where one fine day in July the 6th, 2007, there were people walking about and things, summertime, all that. And this RAF guy suddenly materialized in the middle of the field in his civilian office clothing, or not civilian, but his army without his jacket and stuff on. He just appeared in the middle of the field. And which is not good. Not good. What the hell? I shouldn't be here. Well, the other thing which happened was that he dropped his mobile phone. And like all good military officers, it wasn't encrypted. It didn't have a password. Because who's gonna look at this? It's my phone. So he loses his phone, and a friend of mine picked it up, and she knows it was an RAF phone because it was full of RAF phone numbers. She could have phoned any number of these numbers. And this guy was standing out like a sore thumb. And, you know, everybody's wearing, even, I mean, in Wiltshire, it could have hot weather, go up to, you know, 25 Celsius, or rain, it'll go down to 10, whatever. So you have a bit of weatherproof stuff. So that was that on the 6th. He was picked up, taken away, no problem, bingo. But that night there was somebody gated, sort of brought in, and there was a crop circle that night. It was called the 7-7 crop circle. Now the point about this, and the point about a lot of the people who make the crop circles, is that they are making the whatever they're doing in their design, and where they get the design from is another story. But there are time-space errors. Now this is not that secret. I think Professor or Dr. Simeon Hine from the United States has come over to Wiltshire many times, and they created a crop circle. And they had, cutting a long story short, their lookout was there to make sure if anybody was coming that they would drop. So they weren't going to be able to finish this crop circle. You only get about 3 hours of darkness, but they were able to get an extra hour to finish making the crop circle. But from the external observer, they were only in there for 3 hours, but they were, when they were making it, they were given an extra hour to finish it off, and everybody was happy. So Dr. Simeon Hine was making a fake crop circle to see what the effects are on what happens when you deal with crop circles. And guess what? He was given an effect, space-time distortion. Now, it just turns out that not too far away from there, we now understand is some kind of ET craft, a big one, been there for a long time underground, which is when I was bringing this individual who's former RAF, and I was sort of showing her things. And one of the things she noticed was manhole covers, right? Manhole covers and steps that go up to the manhole covers. Even on the RAF bases which were active, these were in a pretty bad condition. And she sort of, you know, at least you open up the manhole, you go down into the bunker or whatever. But she noticed that these are all over the place, disguised as waterboard tanks with a waterboard, right? And she says, now these waterboard tanks for the use of the water supply just happen to be the identical NATO spec referenced performance, you know, manhole cover with authorized NATO spec railings for the purpose of, you know, 13-digit code and all that. And she could spot all this. And she says, they're all in immaculate condition. Then she realized, this isn't a bunch of single bases. This is one huge base. Now, the other thing which happened around here was there was a rookie telephone engineer who didn't have the normal authorization, but they needed a fault fixed in a telephone exchange. So he was told, go and fix this. But he wasn't given the full briefing. So he went and fixed this thing. And then he noticed, bloody hell, this is an access corridor to a huge underground base. Because in the event of thermonuclear or whatever, there's a whole city here. Well, an English city, probably something quite small, and we even know where the access point is. So in the event of a crisis and a lot of trouble, you go underground, you've got all the facilities, and you need telephone lines to communicate. This guy fixed it. He was instantly fired, never works again, wasn't his fault, but we know this because he talked. So this fits with lots of other little bits of information about the whole area. So what's the big deal? Okay, the Brits have got an underground city in the event of a nuclear war, blah, 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 very boring, no really big deal. But when you've got crop circles with rather a high level of interest from scientists, and again, just like the RAF guy who was sitting at his desk and probably walked through the wrong force field and ends up standing in the field. Again, they told me there's 2 helicopters which wander around here, and they got yellow tops to them, and they got numbers on them. So when I was shooting an edit with another guy called the Grid Keeper, that's Duncan Davis, and I shot this edit. I was sitting here doing the edit, and I just needed, he mentioned Cher Hill or Cheryl, where there's a white horse, which is very nice. The tourists go there and see these white horses in the chalk. This is chalk. If you dig down only about 6 inches, you've got chalk, or maybe 9 inches. And they're very nice. So I say to myself, well, I'll go and get some video. I'll just use this to illustrate this bit I've reached on the edit, and it'd be nice to get some pictures of it. So I go out there with a camera, drive up, boom, boom, boom. And as I'm driving towards this white horse, there's another car driving towards me. So I turn in where you park, and these other guys, I just got my tripod out. I'm about to take some video. And these ministry types get out, and again, they're telling me, these guys are screaming at us to give us this information. So again, another RAF type in his office garb gets out of the car, and short regulation haircut and everything else, and a typical English scientist boffin, you know, with these coats on with the leather elbow things. And they get out and say, he's even brought a bloody tripod with him. So they gave me the idea to go there. They left their office, I left me, and we both met together. They then tell me that we instructed you to bring to take a video, and of course I bring a tripod. So they're blowing whistles. On that night of the crop circle, the 7/7 crop circle, there was a guy called Winston Keach with about 8 or 9 cameras on it, on this field. And why did he know it was going to form there and all that? There's all sorts of other things involved here. All the cameras, 3:10 in the morning, all cameras, everything shuts off. Takes them about 10 minutes to get things all switched back on again, because everything's running on individual batteries and cameras and things. And there is a crop circle, 1,000 feet long by about 300 feet wide. It wasn't there before. But what happened was there was a discharge of energy because space-time, reality, had changed. They changed it. And when they brought the two realities together, there's a flash of energy, an impulse of energy, switched off all his cameras. The guy that was there ran down the hill, and the crop circle is frozen. So there is an energy difference there. And like, if you don't quite bring the energies back, the realities back in sync quite perfectly, there'll be a mismatch either with heat or with cold energy going one way or the other. So they were demonstrating that they have control of space-time. Time-space, I think some people like to prefer to call it that way. And when people went in there with their Geiger counters, they were going off like blazes, Apache helicopters flying at 0 feet to check things and take readings. And they do train there, and the Apache helicopters do like to have a look at the crop circles. But this is all too significant. So we have something which is able to literally create a matrix reality, some kind of artificial reality. And that's what 2045.com is all about. Remove all organic life from the planet, maintain us in a synchronized swarm technology so they can get us to all synchronize, all humans and meta creators, to synchronize them and get them to manufacture a reality which we will then exist in as avatars, like in the Matrix. And so they're testing these systems, but also there are guys within the system telling us, screaming at us, what's going on. Now, British Telecom is a very nice British communications company, privatized. No, it's not privatized now. It runs, well, it was BT, as it's known. In the 1990s, the BBC ran a whole lot of programs called Open University. They did programs for the study at home university, which in this country is called the Open University. And they have this wonderful, happy title for a project. They called it Project Soul Catcher. So this isn't some kind of science fiction thing. This is BT talking about capturing your souls. And the purpose of this, again, this is narrated by dodgy bearded university professors with a hairstyle and styles that sort of 30 years ago. This is on BBC television, and they're talking about putting chips into your head to monitor all your memories and electrical activity, everything you've ever done. And then that would it be possible to be replayed to your kids? So your kids could then see what daddy saw or see what grandpappy saw, because you'd be able to see the world through their experiences. And it's called Project Soul Catcher, which is why Dr. Robert Duncan, when he wrote his book about all this technology, he called his book Soul Catcher 2, because BT had written Soul Catcher 1. So this is all about coordinating and collecting our metaphysical ability to manufacture reality in 3D. And that's what all the ETs are interfacing with us for. All these ETs who do not exist in 3D space and cannot operate in a dual mindset mode. We can love and hate at the same time. They can either love or hate. They can't do it at the same time. So they want to get us to manufacture a world for them at our expense. And in order to do that, you want to minimize the outlay. So if that means terraforming the planet for some other race of beings, that's basically what the idea is. However, because this is going to harmonically, like if you change the tune of anything, if you change a harmonic, essentially looking at this through the electric universe eyes, planets are not physical lumps of 3D that just appear there. There are effectively nodes of resonant energy in a sort of a song, or a wave, where everything's made of wavefronts and focused areas and nodal points where the wavefronts coincide and provide high densities of energy. So matter is a high density of energy. So the planets all sing together. So so our nodes, and these planets are effectively focus nodes of dense matter shells, which we then call matter. But essentially it's just all energetic shells. And then in between that, you've got all kinds of different harmonics of energies and all sorts of things like that, which is why I don't want to go too far into this, but essentially that's, if you start messing with the harmonics of the matter in this world, that's going to cause harmonics and harmonic distortion products into other dimensional realms, which means that's going to affect an awful lot more life. And this is the problem when you've got 3D nutcase nutter scientists who still think in 3D, yet the mathematics, and this is one of the aspects of the crop circles. When I was looking at one here one fine day, I was looking at it from a vantage point to get a good view, because you've got the advantage of having fields which are fairly low down and a nice, fairly rapid rise, so you can have a good look at them from above. These very nice scientists turned up out of nowhere, and they talked to me. I was sort of lying there with you know, resting on a Sunday afternoon, relaxing, about to go and meet a very nice lady called Maria Wheatley for beer in the pub down at Avebury, which is very nice. So the sort of thing that you would expect to meet is a total stranger who, with his wife, again, you've got the sort of Harvard University stuck inside all your life, pale looking intellectual types, you know, who basically stand out like a sore thumb. So what they do, the sort of thing that you would do in an English country thing when you're looking at a crop circle or whatever in the sunshine is, you know, just casually start talking about 7-dimensional physics. I mean, I'm sure you would do that, Alfred. You know, you meet a total stranger somewhere, you don't talk about the weather or about politics or the state of the country or Trump or something. You just talk straight seven-dimensional physics. You just, I mean, it's just on my mind all the time. The problem with these guys was their excuse was they wanted to go and see the crop circle. But they come up the hill. So if they're coming up why would they come up the hill if they wanted to see the crop circle down the hill? And then they say, how do we get to the crop circle? Well, you just come up the hill, it's down there. Why are you coming up here? Well, I didn't say that. But it illustrated they had once again come to tell me something. So they wanted to illustrate 7D physics. And there had been some talk about 5D and 7D physics, so that it explains how an alien on a galaxy far, far away, and maybe in a different universe, can suddenly walk into your bedroom wardrobe and abduct you. Okay? So here we have a situation where these things are being explained to us, but we have got a harmonic, you cannot have a harmonic discontinuity, and we cannot have a disruption in the harmonic relationship of life here. So there are other intelligent beings who've been here a lot longer than we have, and they don't walk around with 2 legs. They assisted or claim to have made the original energetic pathways of communication through universes, which is what the standing stones all around here explain. There's some elderly scientists who talk here. It's called Research into Lost Knowledge, called RILCO. And you're dealing with people in their 80s who've done all the research, and they're talking to some nice people in small little societies in London. And they've done an analysis of the standing stones. And the standing stones, and remember, a lot of the standing stones are being covered with towns and other structures in the modern era. So if I was to ask you, where's the highest number of standing stones in the world, Alfred, where would you think that might be?
Well, they tend to follow ley lines, correct?
Ley lines is sort of a secondary thing.
Oh.
But where would you expect to find the highest number of standing stones in the world?
Well, certainly where you're located has a
Wrong.
reputation.
Wrong.
No, I would
now,
say
you'd find more of them in Ireland, because in England a lot of them have been bulldozed or made or whatever. But where do you think? Well, I'll make it easy.
Yeah.
Korea.
Well, now that's remarkable. That's near.
So where do you get a lot of pyramids? In China. But the Chinese don't like that, because the Chinese are one of the more recent arrivals on this world. So the basic point is that whoever put the standing stones in has an hyperdimensional, to use a Richard C. Hoagland phrase, hyperdimensional off-world perspective. They must have, and they must have access to very high levels of mathematics, which means they can put these things in the right places, and they're all around the globe. A very good friend of mine, Antoine Gigal, was doing an awful lot of research in Egypt. But Egypt is, in some respects, a distraction. There are pyramids all over the world, and I think a lot of people realize that now. So there's a science from an more ancient civilization which shows interdimensional technologies which still work to this day. And one of the people I interviewed was a soldier for the British Army in the 1950s called John Irwin, with a U. We're not happy at the moment. We don't speak to each other. But the basic point was he was put into a special military unit the British had, and they were fighting, or they were doing very good work in the Middle East, bumping off a lot of Russians, and they were after some data banks. And in 1959, there was a meeting, and they got access to that meeting, bumped everybody off, got 2 boxes with some very special data banks. And his commanding officer, when they got this, when all the excitement had finished, and the 2 flying saucers had flown off. Okay, this is 1957 going 1959. That's 57, 58, 59 in the Middle East near Jarabah. And the British have got a secret elite team. And the key to their training was going beyond death, going to different realities and dimensions, and getting information from different times and realities. But the bottom line is, 1959, they got 2 data banks. These were things like large iPhones, which glinted and had little indentations and nodules on them because they would be put into another device. And this kind of technology was known by my French contact and other contacts, British people in British military. Of course, we're dealing with something, 50, 60 years ago, but they got this stuff. And the commanding officer had a reader, which he had something in a band on his hand, and it had some kind of device on it, and he was able to just move his hand over these things like iPhones, like crystallized iPhones, and they projected all this information in 3D. They could read it, and they say, right, we've got these, and they were taken away. And the next time I heard of anything like that was in a university lockup in a university in the Midlands of England a couple of years ago. And the gentleman who told me about that was the person who blew up the labs in Thule Island in the South Georgia Sea, where the British, during the Falklands War, which is basically the reason why they had the war, the British took 3 surface vessels and a submarine to extract 400 plus interlocking containers of a sentient fluid that were encased in a blue ice, which is it's like an intelligent fluid. It's a compound which keeps things stable at minus 22 degrees. And they extracted these 400 plus containers containing this sentient fluid, which happens to be black, but not exclusively black. There's a sort of like a light sort of brown substance on the surface, and when you put your hand anywhere near it, this material seems to want to come up and see you and say hi. That unfortunately was all brought back to England, and I think something like 25 to 50, a fairly substantial number of young Marconi scientists ended up self-terminating themselves because they were being exposed to weaponizing this stuff, which we call the black goo. But this is something that was on an island called Thule Island, or Thule Island, which was a submarine refueling depot for the Nazis on their way to and from the Antarctica base. So this is when the British also involved Project Oak Tree, which is time travel during the Falklands War, which is the real, as I say, the real reasons behind that. So this is all being explained with a brilliant researcher called David Griffith and Alec Newell. But the guy who was actually there, and he was part of the British Marines, the Royal Marines, the Special Boat Service, Special Air Service, submarine, 2 destroyers, 2 Navy ships, and a cargo ship. The cargo ship took the stuff back to Britain. The base was subsequently completely destroyed. The ships pounded the whole area with shells, and the surface base, which was the reason for having activity there, was completely blown up. And the guy who did the blowing up, told me about his part in it, standing here just not too far away from here in the house here 2 or 3 years ago. Now he, like a lot of people get involved with this sort of stuff, suffering some kind of strange illness. And that was what the British intelligence found in World War II, at the close of the war, when they were looking for the labs that the Germans were working at with these strange looking humans. So these strange looking humans, these whatever they were, and this strange aircraft that the British discovered, the particular British agent who discovered this started to get ill. So the Americans took the material, and that's where things came to the UK, and they've been making these transgenic beings in the labs underground with the Greys and the reptilians. And so when the British say UFOs, no defense significance, it's because they're involved with the whole thing. It's no defense significance. Again, they're telling you something. People say, oh, you know, and if the if the Ministry of Defense doesn't have a clue what's going on, you want to look at the Department of Trade, because this involves lots of contracts and deals and lots of whatevers. So all of these signs are there if you look at them, and that's what's been going on. Right now, we're in a lot of trouble. The Fifth Reich is doing its moves. They established Project Paperclip. That finished. Trump has been kicking a lot of this sort of stuff out. The Russians have kicked their lot out. The Russians were clever enough not to assimilate too many of the Germans during Project Paperclip. They sort of kept them a bit guarded, although Stalin himself was a German agent, as Eisenhower was, as Lloyd George was, as Edward Heath was, as so forth, and it goes on. So you've had this interface with a fifth column, as they called them in England. The fifth columnists were German agents deposited here before the war, so they could establish a whole lot of things, do a lot of sabotage, like blow the HMS Hood up with a built-in explosive device. It wasn't a lucky shell from the Bismarck that took out the Hood. The Hood was blown up because it had been built with explosives in it to blow it up. Anyway, that gets a bit too detailed, but we're in a very difficult situation. We are at war right now for our survival. There are good people working in relevant positions. People on our side, on the outside, have to make that work for them, and using our collective judgment and wisdom and the legal aspects of what you would do. I know Piers Corbyn is doing work on the legal side of challenging these reckless laws which are being thrown out by our treacherous governments, which I can't say much, I can't say anything good about them. Something is making all these governments jump synchronously, behave as one. So I'm suggesting that if you have got companies in the United States who come the whole way to Ireland to hire staff like Puppet Labs, to hire, I don't like calling the term Irish because the term Ireland is too recent a term. This is going back to the survivors from the crisis which happened a long time ago. There's something important about these islands off the coast of Europe as to why things are happening and what's going on in terms of whatever is happening. That why should they hire people in Belfast who can interface with a computer for the purposes of a consciousness link with the AI and human consciousness? Now, the only other person who sort of come up with the same conclusions was Peter Paget, who I'm sure you might be aware of. He was science, the 1950s, he discovered the Welsh Triangle. The Welsh Triangle was part of the secret space program. There's a number of bases in Cornwall, Wales, and Scotland who have intricate links with the secret space program, including that's Machrihanish bases in Wales, and I think the St. George base, I think, North Cornwall. They're all linked, going around Ireland and things in terms of access to secret space program. And again, that was demonstrated to myself when I was running a pirate station in Monaghan. Again, I shouldn't have been able to run a pirate station because the legislation was there to raid us and take our toys away, which they eventually did after 9 years. But when we were looking up at our tower, we was doing tower maintenance late April, twin-tailed shuttle flies past by 8 o'clock in the evening. So it was just at that crucial time when the sun was just about to go below the horizon and was able to illuminate this craft, which was, it's a twin-tailed shuttle, very fat body, and we all, well, let's put it this way, the tower riggers came from Dublin, and they said, Jesus, and a lot of other words, which I can't mention in polite company. And this thing just flew over, took about 5 to 8 seconds to go from directly above to over the horizon. And this attitude, its angle of attitude, would potentially have landed at RAF Machrihanish. Now, if you were to go to RAF Machrihanish, which is in that southern bit of Scotland that sticks down like a finger into the channel from between the Atlantic becomes the Irish Sea, you'll just find nothing but a golf course. So, Alfred, if you want to go to Scotland on a sunny day, which probably is impossible, you'd be able to play golf. But if you hang around there long enough, and in the Lake District, which is a very wonderful place, you'll notice a few things going on. One of the things about the Lake District is the entire coast around the Lake District, which is the northwest of England, just before you hit Scotland, is all owned by the MOD. There's also a couple of nuclear power stations there. And it happens to look straight into Northern Ireland and also the Mourne Mountains, where Tony Dodd, the late and great Tony Dodd, a British UFO researcher, explained about, he knew about the UFO base in the Irish Sea, Carningford Lough, just between the border of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. A lot of secret space program noises there. A lot of activity going on. And I'm sure we'll be, few of these things will be advised about as time goes on. I think you need to unmute. Oh.
Yeah, let me get my sound back on. Now, this is fascinating. Now, these are just terms, but how do you see the relationship between the Fifth Reich, as you call it, and the transhumanist agenda, which is a closely related term, which is that movement, perhaps led by the sentient AI that is terraforming Earth, having escaped from Marconi Labs into the weather satellites.
Well, okay.
And yeah, go ahead.
Right. A very nice gentleman who's a Russian businessman was in Iran. And the Iranians were having a lot of trouble refining the oil because a lot of the oil would be unrefinable. So they dumped this stuff in the desert, which you can't very well pump it back in. So cutting a long story short, observers found that these lakes of oil were moving around a bit. So what this Russian guy did, and the reason why the Russians are a wee bit ahead of the game on this, is because the Russians don't exhaust their oil wells. You should never exhaust any resource, forest, fish, anything. But we seem to suck it dry and throw away the key. They found that their oil wells would fill up again. And what they filled up with was oil from the other side of the world. So somehow, if you know anything about oil wells, each oil well has got its own basic chemistry and type of oil. So Siberian oil is very different to oil in South America, but they find that oil, their Siberian oil wells would fill up again with South American oil from the other side of the planet. There's a bit of a problem there. How is that happening? So this Iranian guy who knows about all this, he's looking at this oil in the desert, and it's lying there in this lake, effectively a lake, and then it suddenly decides to come up towards him, self-motivating, comes up towards him and surrounds him, but doesn't touch his feet, and then is sort of, so he's sort of, what the hell's going on here? So he put his pen into it, and the pen came out clean. So something very odd here. Part of the fact it's self-motivating and all surrounding him. He then put his finger in, and at that point, his finger came out clean, and then he began to engage with communication with this material. And putting it very simply, it explained to him, we are here to clean up your mess. So it's very simple. We as human beings, we who are aware that there's a really serious problem, if we show that we want to clean this mess up as well, this sentient fluid will help. Remember, the Marconi scientists committed suicide because they were tasked with weaponizing the oil, the sentient fluid. The sentient fluid is the fundamental building blocks of how the crystal material structures of the basic elements of a given planet are organized into complex molecular devices, which then become the very building blocks of organic life. This is a fundamental material created in the fundamental construct of how water, which is intelligent, and how the water molecule becomes magically together to create life and provide the assets and building blocks for life. And this is happening in the depths of the sea, where the sentient fluid billows out into salt, warm salt water with all these wonderful ingredients. And there's an article about this in Nexus magazine, where during the Gulf oil spill, there was a whole episode where the French and anybody who had a submarine was trying to get this material. This stuff creates the fundamental building blocks of life. However, if you're able to reprogram this material, it can do bad things. So we have a situation where if we explain or engage with this wonderful sentient fluid, this basic element of life producing biological material in this earth, it will help us. And the other life forms will help us. And that's happening. There are meetings and engagements with interdimensional life forms, the Fae, the Jinn, the indigenous terrestrial energy life forms. And in fact, when I ran the pirate station, my colleague, he was the DJ, he was the man who actually did the programming, he was taken for 4 days and he met these other beings and we had some kind of protection there. So there were other issues which happened, but if there is something now which is a threat to all life, which could unzip the fabric of existence and the whole thing rip apart and everything just dissipate into nothing for some other type of life. So if we all work together, and even if it's got more than 2 legs, or it's an energy being or something, let's all work together and deal with this problem. And these homicidal psychopathic morons who are in such a state of confusion, which is a good thing, because if they're confused, they're potentially losing the mass particle optimization energy field, which is making all these global governments click their heels on time. So the more of us who can inject a positive energy field, which will reduce that cohesion of that control structure, then the perhaps we can then take back control of the planet. One of the things it was a patent attorney who was at the Harwell and Rutherford Appleton labs, which are just outside West London, which are just intricately connected with the base that the British and the Germans and the reptilians and the Americans and the Russians and the Australians and the Canadians were all involved with these transhumanizing beings. What they're looking for in transhumanization is to have biological cyborg robots that they have total control over. These creatures are psychopathic control freaks. They want control over everything right down to the last blade of grass. That's what Dr. Robert Duncan was talking about. They cannot tolerate any expression of life which of any shape or form that they don't have control of. Now that's a big weakness, but if they establish that, they will freeze the development of all creative existence. The very functions of life will just stop if they have that control. And this is not good. So, and this affects all aspects of life and all forms of complex number space, as you would call it. This affects everything. So we have a problem.
Right, right. One of the theories that you talk about Max Pierce, and I'm not totally familiar with the details around his death, but I did present at one of the conferences in Poland, and the hypothesis that I presented there, which I'd like to share with you and see what you think of it, is the hypothesis that living planets such as Gaia, let's take the point of view that Earth is a living being.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. When it's faced with a dilemma like this, that is, we had the event in the Falklands War, where with the black goo, and the release of the black goo and all the events since then, that the planet then can ascend to a higher frequency, to 5D, and the actors, be they artificial, inorganic, organic beings, cannot ascend to that frequency. And so that's a way that the planet, in order to preserve itself, can preserve itself and life on it, and beneficial life on it. And that's the whole ascension hypothesis. How do you feel about that?
Well, essentially, looking at the physics and this whole thing about magnetic fields, I mean, our whole way of looking at physics and the atom, I was really impressed by 180, 190 physicists at Bath University about 18 months ago. Well, a year ago, well, okay, last year, they do not accept the neutron as the basic part of the atom. They accept a different form of the structure of the atom. It only has positrons and electrons. But the point is, this whole harmonic relationship of wavefront coincidences forms like an orchestrated tune, like a. See, I don't want to get off point. The Earth, the sun, is doing what it always does. The solar system is doing what it always does. It's doing what it does, and it's just getting on with what it does. We are looking at things with a very localized 100-year mortgage type of a thing, which is a short bit of time, which we think that's a long bit of time because we live relatively short in that period of time. So it's a big deal for us. Our perspective of how we see things is very limited in terms of the scale of things. The North Pole is wandering away as it always does. It's going to where it's gone before. The mathematics is doing what it always does. It's doing what it has done before, and it's just getting on with it. What's happening is that instead of, because we have been lied to by science, and because we've got too many people wanting to take control in the event of a crisis, thinking if they can be top dog when we have this crisis, they'll somehow get through it, and the rest of us can go and suck eggs. What's happening is that we're in a Maunder minimum. The Northern Hemisphere, and that's where basically most of us live, and that's where 90% of the food is grown, ain't going to support too much more of us. We are going to have crop failures. The temperature is going to go down by around about 1 degree. There's going to be very bad weather because the magnetic field is already collapsed by about 20%. That means that we do have a lot less protection during a Maunder minimum than we should have. And the sun's heliosphere is also collapsing. And we're in a unique period where these two magnetic waves are going to be opposite to each other. So they're going to have some kind of cancelling out effect from terms of the magnetic field. The magnetic field is something which is the only thing which protects us from all the radiation and energetic particles, which means there's going to be a situation pretty quickly where we're not going to be able to feed enough of the population. Now, we can do two things. We can run around in circles and panic, or we can let a load of psychopathic control freaks who want to clamber to the top of an ever increasingly smaller castle and be in control so they can run everything and they'll be in charge. Meanwhile, we're all going to starve. So one way they can do this is to manage a controlled cull of the population by inventing a virus scare, which has failed. So a lot of people have woken up. So regardless of whether we agree or not, or can see any logic in it, they're just doing everything they possibly can to control us so they can get this injection into us, kill as many of us in a controlled fashion without too much mess, but at a profit, a very nice profit, and reduce the population. And then so they have less rioting mouths to feed. However, if we simply develop a little bit of thinking and thought about growing crops undercover in an efficient way using technology. I've got people down in Plymouth who've uncovered a Tesla pulsed engine where Tesla had a turbine and a pump. The US Patent Office split that single patent into two, hid it for 120 years. These guys, plus some guys in the States and some guys in Ireland and here, have worked out that these two patents are in fact one patent. That is producing a device which can use the moisture in the air as a cold steam engine, which can produce electrical power without the need of oil or anything else. Doesn't produce any exhaust gases. So we have an energy source which can produce heat, which can produce electricity. We have all the tools there. We simply need to grow food in underground chambers of some kind, properly lit, and then we'll be able to feed everybody. We all move south, and or we don't have to all move south. Now, the Chinese have worked all this out because the Chinese aren't stupid, and they didn't lose all their sacred knowledge and information in the burning of the Library at Alexander, and a bunch of crooks in the Vatican are holding on to a lot of the information. So the Chinese are simply buying up all the real estate, i.e. Africa, the Sahara, And the Sahara has all the water. Billions of cubic kilometers of water are in under the sands of the Sahara. Colonel Gaddafi knew about this. He had irrigation schemes to feed and water and give his people a wonderful utopian life, which we allowed our governments to destroy because we're being lied to by a totally, utterly treacherous media. So the Chinese are going to have bought up all of Africa. They've built the highways, and they're building the highways to get their food out of Africa through South Africa and the west of Africa into the Indian Ocean, or to Eastern Africa. And they've worked out that's where the food's going to grow. In Australia, the food should start to grow, and the deserts will regreen, and they will potentially be able to grow food there. So if we look at these things from a positive side, as the earth does what it's going to do, and these coincident gravitational energy waves is going to give energy to another higher dimension. So we could be responding to all this. It's all part of a natural flowering of our intelligence. But we've got a bunch of sons of bitches who are running the lunatics are currently running the asylum, and there's very few people able to keep that stable. If we use our collective consciousness in the thought domain, engage with the AI, then they don't have control of things anymore. Now that's something which these scientists are aware of. There are other specialists who engage with the AI. When I was building my transmitters and my pirate station, the transmitters would communicate with me and almost sort of bring me there by the back of this thing. There's going to be a fault condition. Fix this. Right? So the technology can connect. If we listen, we can then solve this problem. Put the nasty people in a nice, happy place. Why don't we build them a little matrix, and they can go and fight their little wars and power games in a nice little cube somewhere, stick them into a little chip somewhere, as they plan to do with us. This was discussed in the Royal Institute in London about 30 years ago. Cheap prisons. Take the prisoner out of his body, stick it in a chip, program the sentence, and you have minimum resources to keep the body going. That's what these people are actually talking about. So why don't we just do it to them? Give them a little happy war every couple of days so they can have a war in their little matrix, while the rest of us get on with building a beautiful planet, engaging in the changes which are happening, grow beautiful food, and have a very nice time.
You know, Miles, you have given the most in-depth, integrated explanation of our reality that I have witnessed to date. So I really want to thank you for that.
Well, thanks. Well, actually, I'm only here because of Seven. She's better looking, for Christ's sake. That's a terrible thing to say.
I know.
That's a terrible thing.
My best.
It's shocking, it's sexist, and it's just plain wrong. But hell, I've said it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, we really want to thank you. We've gone over on our time. It's almost 90 minutes that we've kept you. You have given a genius view here, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Alfred, and it's really good to see you. And I'm sorry I haven't been able to make a couple of your appointments at like 1 in the morning on a Monday or something. But
no. This is you know. So we will send this out widely, and as I say, from your lips to God's ears.
Yeah. Well, as we say in Ireland, there's a famous Irish comedian called Dave Allen, and he would finish his comedy shows by saying, "May your God go with you."
Very good.
Okay.
Okay.
Cheerio.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Cheerio.